Living in a doorman building in New York City is typically the dream, but finding an affordable apartment that you like in a doorman building in a neighborhood that you want to live in isn't always that easy. Depending on the neighborhood or the budget that you're looking at, this may be really, really hard to find. So what do you need to be prepared for if your building doesn't have a doorman? First off, I want you to know it's completely normal to live in a building that doesn't have a doorman. And this doesn't mean that these buildings are bad in any way, shape, or form. A lot of these buildings do go through other measures to make sure that the building is still secure. Because when people think of not having a doorman, the first thing that they think of is this building safe? Are other people going to be able to get in that aren't supposed to be there? And this is a valid concern, but a lot of times these buildings are taking extra precautions to make sure that they can compensate for not having a doorman. Now, I do have to say, from living in a building that didn't have a doorman versus one that did, you do tend to feel a lot safer with a doorman. Now, I have also lived in a building with a doorman where the doormen actually weren't very good at their job and didn't really care that much. And even then, people were still getting into the building that didn't belong in the building. Literally, in one doorman building that I lived in, I actually witnessed cops arresting somebody in the lobby past where the doormans were because somebody got into the building that wasn't supposed to be there. And people can argue that maybe the doorman helped kind of alert the police of what was going on, but at the same time, they still got past the doorman. So I can definitely tell you that just because there's a doorman doesn't always mean the doormen are either doing their jobs or the building is completely safe. So when you're looking at a building without a doorman, ask what the security system is like. Take a look when you're actually going into the building and figure out exactly what it takes for a person to get into that building. What do they have to do to get past the door and get inside? But it's also going to be a way to secure the building from other people who aren't supposed to be there as well. Nowadays, packages are always a concern for people when moving to a new New York City building. So everybody gets tons and tons of Amazon packages and packages from tons of other providers and tons of other packages from other retailers as well. So you might be thinking, okay, what's going to happen to my packages? As a New York City real estate agent, I have seen some buildings have really good systems for this, even though they don't have a doorman. And then I have seen other buildings have terrible systems and the packages are basically just all thrown in the lobby and you have to kind of sort through them yourself. So worst case scenario, that will be the case. The packages are thrown in the lobby and you have to sort through them yourself. Some of these buildings do have a dedicated package room, so at least there's going to be an area where all the residents are going to be able to sort through their packages. Now, some buildings that are a little bit more with the times do have some type of like Amazon or package locker where you're actually able to put in your unit number and then the assigned locker releases your package. Now, you don't see these a ton in New York City buildings just because these lockers tend to take up a lot of New York City space. So if you lived in another apartment building outside of New York City, you might have had one of these lockers, and they do exist in New York City. It's just that because of the amount of space that these lockers take up, not a ton of buildings are able to provide them for the residents. So you're going to have probably one of these three options. And if you've ever come across a building with another system, let me know in the comments because I would love to see what these other buildings are doing as well. Now, another thing to consider with security is how are guests going to be able to visit you when they come to your apartment? Now, I've lived in some buildings where it has been so easy to get into the building where my guests can basically just go up no problem and they really don't have to do anything to get past the door. And that was convenient when I had people visiting me, but definitely wasn't probably so safe on the safety side. So just for safety purposes, you kind of do want your visitors to have to go through some steps to get inside the door, whether they have to buzz you up, whether they have to do some type of code to get through the door. You do want it to be a little bit secure. Now, you don't want it to be so crazy to the point where it's going to be such an inconvenience for you to have to come get your guests every single time. But at the same time, just for your safety and the other residents' safety, you do want it to be a little bit difficult for a visitor to get through the door. Now, what is a pro of not having a doorman? Doormen actually are very, very expensive in New York City buildings. So what do I mean by that? Not only are doormen calculated in the rental fees that you're paying the building, but on top of that, you're expected to give a certain amount for pretty much every single doorman. So if your building has 5 doormen or more, then you're expected to give a certain amount to each doorman. And a lot of these buildings even slip envelopes under your door to basically entice the residents to give these gifts. And it is the right thing to do, but it's an extra cost. And especially if your building has a ton of doormen, this really adds up. And you do not have to worry about that if you're in a building that doesn't have a doorman. So there's been some research done, and on average from non-doorman buildings and doorman buildings, the difference in price is about $1,000 a month. Now, I have to say, after doing so much business in doorman buildings and in non-doorman buildings, $1,000 seems pretty low to me. Most of the time, it's probably, I would say more so between $1,000 and $2,000 just from my recent experience. I did find this stat right at the end of 2023. I'm filming this at the beginning of 2024, but this could be a little bit outdated as well because pretty much you're seeing a difference between $1,000 to $2,000, so somewhere in between that amount. But also that could depend on the neighborhood, and they're looking at New York City as a whole, so they're also considering the outer boroughs outside of Manhattan, so those buildings have doormen as well. So overall, do I think that a doorman building is completely necessary in New York City? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've lived and worked in plenty of places without doormen, and it could be completely fine. It really just depends on the building. So do your diligence and use your gut feeling. When you walk around the neighborhood, when you walk inside the building, do you feel safe? Do you feel like you're okay living there? If you do, then you can 100% move forward with that apartment and feel okay with the decision you made to not live with a doorman. And there's a ton of neighborhoods neighborhoods in New York City where the prices of these doorman buildings are so crazy that it almost feels like no matter what budget you have, you're never going to be able to afford a doorman building in that neighborhood. You're not alone with this. So many people feel this way. So I don't want you to be scared when you don't have a doorman building. I want you to use your judgment and just look around and pay attention to how you feel. Now, I would love to know, have you lived in a building with a doorman or without a doorman? As always, I just love hearing from you guys.